Hello everyone, welcome back to the TJOmega channel for day 1540 of our daily content grind. So, I started getting to thinking about all of those toy lines that Hasbro has released over the years, where it feels like very little, if any, effort was actually put into it, and it seems like the only reason it exists is because of trademarks. Trademarks are a completely different world. They are very valuable. You can't let other companies just name products after your products because not only is it making confusion, it is also taking attention away from what it's supposed to be. So you need to do what you can to save all of these really important names. That way we can still have toys like Grapple and not Solar Storm Grapple in the future. So, over the years, Hasbro has always had these ways of dumping off names to preserve trademarks. As long as you are still using the trademark, you can keep it active and under your control. So that does mean every now and then Hasbro just decides, let's just put out whatever, and we'll just dump some names into there just to keep things afloat. And those trademarks are so valuable to Hasbro as a brand, it's actually worth putting out a low-effort toy line just for the sake of hanging on to them. So that's what we're looking at today. Sometimes they are sublines, sometimes they are, microcosms within Transformers, and sometimes they're full toy lines themselves. But regardless, here are 10 toy lines that exist solely for trademark. We're going to start with one of the earliest examples of this, and that comes from the mid-90s, and that was Machine Wars. So don't get me wrong, there's plenty of Machine Wars fans out there. We want to make this clear. None of these toy lines I am talking about are necessarily bad. They are just there for a specific purpose. And Machine Wars had two purposes. One was to keep a accidental promise at BotCon to continue supporting vehicular Transformers during Beast Wars. But the other one is the fact that Beast Wars presented them no opportunity to use some of their most important names. The likes of Soundwave, Starscream, Thundercracker, Skywarp, things like Mirage, Hoist. They wanted to hold on to names like that, despite the fact Beast Wars was supposed to be about completely new characters, and very few, if any, G1 names were going to fit anything they were about to do. So, that's what Machine Wars was. That is how you ended up with characters like Machine Wars Starscream, who shares literally nothing with the original Starscream other than they are both jets of some kind. That's how you have a Soundwave who is a missile tank. Things like that. Oddities. It's all for the sake of keeping hold of those names. And we do know Beast Machines or Machine Wars had a low effort level to it because the packaging and the font, all of it was taken straight from the template they made Beast Wars from. It's a quick cash-in line using a bunch of leftover molds, but the most important thing about it is it allowed them to keep a hold of some of the most important names in Transformer history without having to explain why this random Beetle Transformer is named Thundercracker. This one is admittedly cheating because this is only sometimes its own subline, but these have been released individually. They've been released in 2-packs, they've been released in 3-packs as their own size scale, so they are always this subline of whatever they are involved with. Thus, I'm going to count it toward this list. But I'm going to put it low because I admit this isn't entirely fair. But minicons are absolutely Hasbro's favorite way in the 2000s to just drop names wherever. So this is a practice that went all the way from Armada in 2002 into and through 2012 with, or not even that, Transformers RID 2015. Whew, this kept up a long time. But basically the idea is these are very small Transformers and you're just a repaint and a quick name away from making sure that your valuable trademark doesn't get swooped up by Mattel. So even in Armada's first year, you look at the minicons we had Prowl, we had Inferno, we had Swindle, we had Mirage. A lot of names that were taken straight from the G1 archives just to make sure No one else got their hands on them, just in case they wanted to do those characters again at a future point. You know, anytime they did something new, this was their way of hedging their bets. Put the trademarks on something else so we can use them later, just in case we have to. And they did this for the 15 years mini-cons were a thing. Who can forget the very first Shockwave toy we had since Action Masters was a mini-con, because they got the trademark. They had the trademark available to pick up. They just had to put it on the very first toy that they absolutely could just to secure it. It ended up being a mini-con. And that's what I mean. Ways of securing trademarks or keeping a hold of them. The line, like those little 2-pack mini-cons, and then the future ones, like the big multi-packs they would do in Universe. We use those for trademark purposes, not necessarily to sell toys people really want. But hey, can't fault them. It worked. We'll be brief on this one because this one is brand new and technically has not quite reached the point of being a name dump toy line, but it has that vibe and it definitely has that potential, and we're starting to see it. It's almost in its infancy right now. And this is the Swapticons. So, just came out this year. We've only got a couple waves out and about so far, but they do fit the criteria of being a trademark only toy line. They are very cheap toys, very simple to produce. You know, you're looking at stickers for the faces of all the characters, you know, but they still do a quick little, cute little transformer thing. So we can actually sell them as individual toys. We can 2-pack them, we can 5-pack them. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in the future there's like some big Omni 10-pack of them, just for the sake of having a ton in one box. But we are already starting to see the namings, right? So like Double Punch is in there already, just because, we want to hold on to that name a little bit longer, just in case. But the one that got me is Clench. Out of nowhere, Clench has a brand new toy for the first time since technically BotCon 2010. It's crazy, right? And this is where you start to see the beginnings of, well, yeah, this could absolutely be a line simply for securing trademarks. They're cheap enough to do, they're easy enough to do. If they've taken off, they don't look like they have, if I'm being honest with you, but just in case they do, and just in case there is a market and a collector market for them, I feel like we're going to get a whole bunch more of those names scattered amongst them. If there's a Series 3, I can guarantee you, you're going to start seeing some weird names just for the sake of getting the names secured. So keep an eye on Swapticons. I feel like we have another of these lines just beginning to emerge. So this goes back to Minicon Shockwave, where sometimes you just need to get a toy out there with a name attached to it, just in case or just because you have intention of making that character soon or down the line, but you just need to get that name trademarked and on a toy as fast as possible to make sure it is ready for its real re-debut as a name. We're going to talk Heroes of Cybertron now. This was Hasbro repacking the blind box PVC figures that Takara was producing at the time, but outside of the blind boxes, so you knew what you got. Marketed as retro figures with classic detailing, the first time in forever that a lot of these G1 designs had any kind of toy presence. The reality was these were coming out during the same year that they were doing a whole bunch of reissues. So these would make it to the market first, make sure that those names were free and clear, and then when they did the reissues of those G1 toys, those names were already secured and ready to go. So in the case of things like Rodimus Prime, they hadn't done a Rodimus Prime in forever, So the first chance they had, let's make sure we have that name, because we are going to be reissuing Rodimus Prime during the commemorative series toys. We need to make sure that that is secure. So that is another way. There's not a lot of unique characters in Heroes of Cybertron that didn't get released as something else later, but they made it to the market first. They made sure that trademark was secure, legally ready, because the last thing they wanted to do was have to start changing a bunch of names from the original G1 cast when the whole point is to be as nostalgic as possible. You know, you didn't want to do Rodimus Major unless you absolutely had to. That's kind of the vibe of this. And there are names that they use this to secure without really, trying here. You know, the build-up figures, Fortress Maximus and Metroplex. There's no sign of them coming for a long time, but that made sure they kept the names. They even tried to secure Gigatron for the future, just in case they wanted to do Deathsaurus in America without calling him Deathsaurus. So this was more of a preemptive line. Make sure the trademarks are there, and then release the toys we actually want to release. Toys were already made, they just had to repackage them. Simple toy line to do, keeps the trademark fresh. Here's another one of those cases where I don't think the toy line is bad, but I do acknowledge that, especially at the time, it was cheap and easy to produce, and a lot of characters were chosen specifically because they had not had any kind of toy representation in a long time, and it was just a great way of securing some names. That's the Robot Heroes. Again, I really liked Robot Heroes. I was a completionist on Robot Heroes because I really liked the little chibi aesthetic. I liked seeing the G1 characters in these cute little battle poses, and it was a nice way of having a full cast of classic characters in a space that didn't really take up a whole lot of room in my living area. So yeah, I liked these until they started throwing bigger ones in during Revenge of the Fallen. I didn't like that. And then just as soon as they started canceling the ones I wanted the most, the Star Saber never came out. One person owns it. Whoever you are, I'm annoyed. But this is a weird holding ground for a lot of characters that otherwise had not had any attention in a long time. This is where a lot of Beast Wars stuff came from. And even outside of the stuff we had just gotten for the reissues when these came out, this gave us not only a little bit more trademark security for the likes of Rhinox and Waspinator, but also ones like Tigatron, who was not in the reissue line at all. There was also cases of things like who else was in this line? Predaking. And it didn't come out in the US. It was only in a few spots in the world, but they made one for Predaking. Keeps the trademark alive, or at least it would if they could get it out in the US. Because they hadn't used Predaking in forever, and there was no way they were going to use Predaking anytime soon. It was all the way until third season of Transformers Prime before we saw anything Predaking again in the US. This was an important release. Getting these little guys out, let them get bigger characters out later. And you're going to kind of understand why tiny little characters get made. And we're going to get to that. Oh, we are going to get to that. For now, Robot Masters was a little bit tame. It was a cool toy line. It did mostly use current trademarks, but the ones it kept were important, and the ones it kept alive, more so. And yeah, it's the precursor for a lot. This is another one rooted in a lot of the current toys at the time, but it made for a really good chance to get some other trademarks out there that they wanted to keep fresh, that they otherwise had no opportunity for. And I know I have some people out there who are just going to love the fact that I'm going to bring this toy line up, and that is the Bot Shots. Cute idea, right? Little well-rolling Transformers, they crash into each other and then flip out into their robot modes, and it's really exciting. And then you have the rock, paper, scissor game that you can play with them. They're neat little figures. And weirdly enough, there's a Galaxy Convoy one, and that's kind of cool. But this is another one of those small gimmick lines that was cheap to produce. Not as cheap as a Robot Heroes figurines, certainly. This one has actual transformation. This one has actual play value going on. Yeah, it's a simple gimmicky toy line that doesn't really have a whole lot of budget to it, but for the most part, it's innocent enough and it's fun enough. I'm not knocking its existence, but it did throw some random characters out there to keep those trademarks going. Aside from just stuff from current media, just to secure the trademarks a little bit more, you also had the likes of Cindersaur showing up. You hadn't seen anything Cindersaur in forever, And I don't think we've seen anything Cinder Source. Well, I take that back. We got Power of the Primes Slash as Cindersaur, if I remember. So, okay, so maybe this kept the trademark warm just a little bit, just long enough to get that toy out there. But you can see what I mean. Even toy lines like this are great opportunities for them to just do figures just in case. Because I guarantee you, they weren't thinking of adding a scout, like a little scout class, basic class, core class, whatever you want to call the size. They were not thinking about adding one to the Dinobots when they came up with this Cindersaur. And they certainly weren't rethinking of painting it into something else. So this was a just in case that actually paid off. And Botshots had a bunch of those. You know, it's a good, again, little toy lines are great opportunities to produce a lot of legal security. We're about to get into a whole lot of those. Let's talk about one right now, shall we? So, you know, one of the biggest producers for Lego is the minifigures, because it's pretty easy. Like, we've got most of the bricks made already. We just have to print the bodies, and then sometimes we get to sculpt new heads. And that's pretty much all you have to do to make a run of Lego minifigs, and they make a mint off of them. Well, Transformers wanted in on that as well. Creo was their second attempt to make a brick building brand. Actually, I should say the third, if we're going to include, Takara's attempt in G2. Point being, this was a brick built system with minifigures, just like Lego, and with a lot of Transformer aesthetic thrown in, they're fine enough, but for whatever reason, Hasbro just never seems to be able to make any kind of room in the building block toy line. It never works out for them. But they kept Creos going for a surprisingly long time, the Transformer one specifically, because they were able to just print characters that people wanted and just put them out there, either as, you know, the star of like a big set of bricks or as their own star. And that would mostly fall down to the blind bags that they were producing. They did quite a few series of these, and it is another dumping ground because it's super easy, right? Print the character's face on a generic head, print their body on a generic body, stick a helmet on them that's as close as we can get with the helmets we've got available, and then just enough bricks for them to make some semblance of an alt mode that looks like them. So that's how you get secured trademarks on the likes of Black Arachnia, who hadn't had anything before or didn't have much since. You know, there was a long time between Black Arachnias. And I believe there's a Waspinator in the line I could say the same thing about. A lot of little toys came out holding on to a lot of names, bringing back all of those random characters just for the sake of keeping a hold of the trademark. And this is just the blind bag stuff that was like the best at it. You also had the likes of the Combiner box sets, which were designed mostly to hold on to a lot of the Combiner names or the replacement names that they were toying with at the time. You also had the likes of the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive box sets that would have an entire year's worth of characters in one box of crayons, meaning an entire year's worth of Transformer names were secured for a little while longer. This is one of those times where I remind you, it isn't just about using the name once. It's about using the name as much as you can to show that it is a very secure trademark that no one else should be able to take. So a lot of these lines are intentionally duplicating names and trademarks because that makes it stronger when you have to defend it in court. It's all legal strategy here. I know it's the most thrilling thing in the world for my audience, but that's the reasoning behind it. And it's the reason why toy lines like this exist. Crayons, great way of getting a lot of names out there for as little money spent as possible. Now, when we talk about Machine Wars, I mentioned that it was one of the earliest attempts to trademark dump a lot of names and keep a hold of them. Well, it wasn't the first attempt. And in fact, this is a subline that in itself is a name dump for the sake of securing a trademark. In late G2, we got the GoBots. Now, later on, we would know them by Spy Changers, but when they first came out in G2, they're just designed to be Hot Wheels style cars. You know, they were designed with like a solid axle that went all the way through the body, meaning they rolled far better than most Transformers. They were Hot Wheel track compatible. But more importantly, easy to do. You know, you pull the arms out, you flip the hood down, you pull the legs out, done. There's your Transformer. And we can just run these for as much as we want. You know, look, here's Rumble. We hadn't had a Rumble toy since 1986, you know, during like the last reissues of that original cassette mold. And then I don't think we had another Rumble toy for, geez, how long? How long before we got another Rumble after G2? This was the only thing that held that trademark alive for the, you know, the better part of, if not longer than a decade. This one individual figure that in no way, shape, or form looks like Rumble, Frenzy, Enemy, anyone from Soundwave's chest. It didn't matter. A lot of these looked absolutely nothing like the character that they were attached to. I think by the grace of Primus, Bumblebee got to be gold. And that's about it. That's about as close as it got, you know? Sideswipe was blue. Why? Why was Sideswipe blue? It didn't matter. Didn't matter to anyone as long as it kept the name alive. And that's all it was meant to do. You know, cheap little repaints. And in fact, this strategy works so well, we did it with Spy Changers later on. You know, after they came back out in 2001, collectors loved the Spy Changers. Quick, simple, like they're, strangely enough, more popular than the G2 GoBots. We refer to these molds to this day as Spy Changers, even though that's not what they originally were. They just took over the popularity of the original, though it's also easier to know what you're talking about when you call them Spy Changers. A little bit of confusion when you call them GoBots. The one on screen right now is the only Trailbreaker toy I had for a long, long time. My boy took forever to finally get a brand new figure. It's upsetting. It was very upsetting at the time. But this happened to a lot. A lot of those Spy Changers ended up as G1 characters, and again, it lets us keep the trademarks fresh, or capture them in the first place. So, yeah, this one was a long-run tradition. It worked in the 90s. Yeah, it worked again in the 2000s. So, good on you. Good on you. You obviously did something right there. To this point, you could probably argue that some of these are just, you know, referential. Some of these lines are doing other things besides just keeping trademarks alive. And I'm just kind of like picking on them or whatever. But from here on out, there is no arguing. That is literally all that these exist for. And we are going to go with the Tiny Turbo Changers for number 2. And again, there's nothing really inherently wrong with these. They're cute, simple little Transformers. I admit I've owned quite a few. I have way too many of the Sharktacons at that size, because I love any size Sharktacon I can get. Point being, very simple. These are usually only like 3 or 4 pieces. Simple PVC construction, just enough paint to get the character across, and blind bagged. So, you know, people bought a ton of them trying to complete collections. But again, they started these in the last night and then moved into just doing generic movie characters at a time when they weren't using a lot of them yet. Studio series, just barely about to be a thing when these first came out. So the likes of Sentinel Prime, for instance, they keep that alive by having this tiny little figure of the guy. But they expanded on, you know, as they go on, they start venturing out into other universes, and they go all the way into Cyberverse, where not only are they used to keep trademarks of existing names afloat, it's the only place where some of these characters actually got figures. This is the only Alpha Strike, which means it's technically our only Striker that we've had since Universe 1. And that's kind of shameful. That's kind of shameful for such a unique character in Transformers. Point being, they are simply designed to be as cheap and easy to produce as possible. That means we can trademark the names. So if they had produced an Alpha Strike, this coming out first means we've secured the trademark. We don't have to worry about it when we send like the real toy, to actual production. Not that that ever happened. But that said, they're only number 2. There's one step further we can go. It's kind of interesting to me that the number 1 toy line for name dumping is barely a toy line in the first place. It is not something I would bother collecting. I know a lot of people didn't bother collecting it, but for some reason, they made a billion of these things. And I think I know why. We need to talk about the Tiny Titans. So, starting in 2015 with RID, these things were blind bagged, 1 figurine per bag, and this time, non-transformable. They were just little figurines with a little trading card stuck in just in case you couldn't tell who it was from the sculpt and the paint, because that was a common thing somehow. Point being, they are simple 1-piece figurines, and that's it. That's it. They get 1, maybe 2 blotches of paint to kind of break up their color a little bit, but they are the lowest of the low effort. They are the cheapest of the cheap. This is something that they could just quick mass produce, throw into a bag, and sell individually. It's like the decoys in G1 if they sold them 1 at a time, which would drive you nuts normally. Especially the fact that these are blind bagged. But this was such a golden opportunity. The cheapest thing we could possibly produce. The easiest thing to produce. And it'll still sell because it's blind bagged. People will just buy them habitually, hoping they get lucky for a new one. But you can just look at this one. This is just 1 wave's worth. And look at this. You got a Cheetor, you got an Acid-Storm, you got a Skybite. You've got a Unicron with his dinky little knife. I always forget that for some reason this sculpt gave him his own little Bowie knife. You got Venom. Or Venom. Take your pick. Point being, it was such a dumping ground for the most obscure characters just in case Hasbro wanted to make full toys of them. Or in the case of Unicron, too valuable to lose, so here you go. Every wave of these looked like this. Exceptionally simple toys. It's hard to even call them toys. It's like if you took the figurines from a board game and sold them 1 by 1. It's that level of effort. This is the only toy line in this entire list I would call bad, because I barely consider it a toy. You don't play with it. Some of these, if they came warped in the bag, you couldn't even stand up. But all they were names. And again, there's a lot of characters from RID 2015 that you only got in one of these. I waited until last year for a Filch to exist, because the only one that existed prior was one of these dinky little things. And for a design I thought was really cool, that seemed like a shame. That's kind of how it went. It's just for the sake of the trademark. And that is your tour down the legal loophole mess and universe that is trademarking. It's important for a big company. It's not the most exciting thing to talk about, but it's kind of absurd how many toys have come out over the years where it seems like the only purpose for their existence is for legal reasons. Legal obligation to use a name, or else you will risk losing it to another company. I don't know. It's just a weird thing to me. But then again, that's Transformers in general. So, thank you everyone for watching. Hope you learned a little bit about how the toy industry works today. It's a little bit of an educational here's 10, but that's how it goes sometimes. I will see you next time.
Hello everyone, I am Astral Agent Magnetar, a Tokusatsu VTuber, and I am streaming 4 times a week over on Twitch, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday afternoons, and a special late night one on late Friday/early Saturday. So come watch, come hang out, and let's make an impact together.